Well, and that opens up a whole other can of worms, which is like, if that's the only thing you're investing in and you spend all this time putting all these ad dollars and traffic into Spotify, guess what? You don't really get a lot of data back. And so it's like, I think the argument could be made that focusing on other areas where you do retain more of that data is going to be a lot more beneficial.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by IndieFounder.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is the podcast where we cover growing and monetizing a fan base and building a music career with marketing strategies that actually work right now based on what we're seeing every single day at our music marketing agency and across our community of thousands of artists and bands. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. This is episode 375. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy, and I'm back today for another episode, part 2 of my conversation with Jonah McLean, who is one of our lead strategists at IndieFounder and also the head of operations here at IndiePreneur. Jonah, what's up, dude?
What's going on, man? Good to be back.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks again for having me in your studio.
Yes.
I'm psyched to...
Synth Wonderland.
Yeah, dude, it's beautiful. I've got keyboards all around me. It's amazing.
Right, you're surrounded.
I'm surrounded by keyboards. It's threatening, honestly.
That's right.
I'm psyched to continue our conversation on music marketing campaigns and answering questions from artists about how tapping into digital marketing for their music marketing can be a huge benefit for them, and sharing stories from artists inside of IndieFounder and sharing details on the campaigns that they've run to hopefully help put our listeners on the right path to answering their own questions and solving the problems that they have inside of their music businesses.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to get back into it. Lots of great stories that we can tell and lots of great results we can share. So it's always fun to put that stuff out there.
For sure. I'm excited about it, man. This is a good one. This is a question that I hear from a lot of artists, and it always comes around the time of record releases, right? A lot of times when I'm talking to artists, especially about agency or just about IndiePreneur as a whole, a lot of artists will come to me and be like, I've got a record that I'm working on and I want to talk about how to market it. And that's a big question. It's like, what are the best things that I can do to market a new album, or how can I market my new record effectively? And especially if you're touring, how can I effectively market a tour promoting my new record? And I know that we get this question a lot, and this is something that we tackle with clients inside of IndieFounder, but I'd love to talk a little bit more specifics with you about this question.
Yeah, man. I think, like, just to start out of the gate, it's like, I think, maybe piggybacking off of even something we talked about in kind of part 1 or the last episode here is like, I think being prepared is a huge part of this question, and a big part of maybe what my answer would be, which is like, touring is a lot of work, a huge lift for artists, and so is releasing a record. And so I think a lot of times people underestimate maybe not how much work goes into that, because obviously I think as artists we all kind of know, but I think what people do underestimate is how prepared they could be for doing a tour or releasing an album, and especially doing both at the same time. And so it's like someone might come into the community or join IndieFounder and say, oh, my record comes out in 2 weeks. Can you help me market it? And it's like, well, yeah, but you kind of missed out on some good opportunity in terms of lead up to that, because not only do you not have a lot of time before your record comes out, but it's like you don't really have a lot of time to leverage, your pre-order or anything exciting like that.
Every music marketer's worst fear is, oh, it comes out in 2 weeks or it comes out in 2 days.
Yeah, it's like, what can we do? And it's like, well, shoot, not as much. So yeah, I think a big thing that can help artists, like if you're working on a record and you want to tour on the back of that record, start as soon as you can, setting up things. And so, yeah, like to the question of what we've done, like I know we've been kind of trying to point back to some founders we've worked with. And so Liz, just using first names to keep everyone anonymous, but is a great example. She was someone that came in and, I think, again, had a solid base, had been doing some touring, but maybe not as effectively as she could have been. And especially in terms of having a record. And so I think for her, it really looked like setting up really strong ad campaigns in local markets that she was touring in to really drive and sell tickets. I think she ended up selling over 1,000 tickets for her tour. And then in conjunction with that, really trying to piggyback off of it with a pre-order campaign for the record that was coming out. It gives you a great opportunity to kind of do double damage in some ways, because, you are setting up separate campaigns for that, but you just have so much to talk about as an artist, and to a new fan or an established fan, there's so much there for them to kind of sink their teeth into. And if you can leverage ads and effective marketing to reach those people with that stuff, you've got a lot to talk about and a lot to share with them, and people love that,
For sure, yeah. I love the preparation part that you kind of led with when getting into that story, because Liz is definitely someone that came in to IndieFounder very prepared. And I only know that really because I actually spoke with her before IndieFounder about agency. And I was like, I really think the best place for you to like flex your muscles and work your music marketing to take it to be as strong as it possibly could is to work with us on the strategy side in a coaching kind of environment. And I'm so glad that it panned out the way that it did, and that she really took ownership over the marketing the way that she did with some help from the team. It really, I mean, super impressive results on the tour marketing for sure. I know that was like the initial first big win, and I want to kind of tap on that for a second. Like, running ads in local markets when you're playing shows is still to this day, in my opinion and my experience, like such a slept on strategy. Like, so many artists don't even, like big artists don't allocate even a little bit of budget to do that. And it's so powerful. Like, you can move numbers.
Yeah, and to further that, it's like, I also think it can be tricky too. So like, if you're an artist that has tried that and maybe like, and you know, not to...
Did I just make it sound way easier than it actually is?
No, I mean, it's because it is slept on. And I think part of the reason a lot of people don't do it is because they haven't had good success. And again, like I did a consult this week with someone that was like, I spent X amount on ads for my last tour and nothing happened. And it's like, not for nothing. It's like, yeah, it could just be something with the market, or maybe there was another show that night and more people were going to that. Who knows? But I think a lot of times it's just like you didn't run the campaign very well. And, you know, not to plug our services, but it's like, I think that's where something like IndieFounder or even Indie Pro comes in, where it's like, hey, you know, work with an expert, somebody that has a lot of experience like you do, or I do, or we do, to where you can cover some of those blind spots and do it effectively, because to your point, it is slept on, you know? So it's like, I don't want to make it out to be the easiest thing in the world, but it's a really great opportunity. And if you do it right, I think you can do a lot of damage from putting that stuff together.
Well said. It's slept on because it's hard. That's so true. And it really comes down to writing great copy, knowing how to structure your ad campaigns, knowing what kind of creatives to use. And I think you're right. Like, leaning on tried and true processes to get you closer to the goal is a lot better than just kind of throwing shit at a wall and hoping that it sticks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is some, like, I've worked with artists with touring where, you know, one show isn't selling well, or these shows, and it's like, yeah, you know, it's going to happen. Like, I don't think every single thing, every single time is just going to be gangbusters. But again, it's like anything. And like we've been talking about, you know, in the last episode as well, these are skills that you need to learn and acquire and build up over time, and find what works for you and your brand and your sound and your audience and all these things. So it's like, I get bummed out for artists that come in and say like, yeah, I've run ads for shows and they don't work. And it's like, well, you know, I probably missed some things that you could probably...
You're probably wrong.
Yeah, you're probably wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
In the nicest way possible.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it though, because I mean, you know, if you get burned on something, I spent $400 on marketing for the show and nothing happened, or I couldn't see any tangible result from that. Yeah, like I could understand why someone would get discouraged, but chances are there's some stuff you missed. And again, you know, working with an expert, somebody that's really knowledgeable in that, you know, that can help you clear a lot of those hurdles.
Yeah, for sure. I want to like zoom in on, if you're listening to this and you're wondering like, well, I am running ads for my shows and I don't know what to think about. They're not working well. I'll repeat what I said. Focus on copy, focus on creative, and focus on your campaign structure. Think about things like running wide campaigns with things like event responses and then retargeting traffic. That's like a very simple sort of process that you can follow. Also, run ads a little bit further out than you might think that you would. I know that's a process that we follow with a lot of clients, is like, don't just do it the week before. Sure, you can get a lot of ticket sales in the 2 weeks leading up to the show, but start the process of warming up a market well before that. Again, this comes down to preparation.
Yeah, exactly. And we said that on the last episode, and I'll come back to it again. It's like, you know, the best time to start working on this stuff, the best time to start working with us, or join IndieFounder, whatever, join Indie Pro, start learning these skills. Best time was yesterday. And to go back to what we were saying, you know, in this particular example, like imagine, yeah, you're trying to sell tickets for a tour and you're trying to sell an album and do a pre-order and all these other things. Like, give yourself ample time. It's a lot of work, you know, even if you have other people on your team, manager, you know, someone that's helping you, someone else in the band. give yourself enough time. It's a lot of work, and you want to have an opportunity to make tweaks and see what's working and what isn't, and be able to go through that process without just saying, oh, it didn't work and I'm shutting it down.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great story. And I think Liz is a great example of all of that.
For sure. Yeah.
I want to address maybe an elephant in the room with you. I don't want to give it a negative connotation necessarily, but I want to talk about the question that I think everyone on our team has heard a number of times over the years. We've definitely talked about this plenty on the podcast. We've talked about it with clients. We've talked about it with Indie Pro members. And that's like growing streaming. How can I grow my streams with smart digital marketing? How can I not end up with a bunch of bot traffic or people clicking in from countries where I don't really have listeners? What can I be doing? And how can I do it in a way that makes sense and is economical or even profitable for me? And this is a hot topic amongst our team. We've definitely, like I said, talked about this on the show plenty. And I wanted to bring it to you today to address it again for anyone who might be listening and wondering like, all right, you guys haven't talked about streaming yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a reason for that because, if the question is like, can I grow my streams? The answer is yes. I think the better question is, should I be growing my streaming? Is that the best thing for me to focus on? And it's funny because, again, in consults that I do, especially for IndieFounder, a lot of people that are a little more, we'll say maybe green to Indiepreneur and what we teach and what we recommend, that is like the biggest goal a lot of times. It's like, oh, I want to hit X number of monthly listeners on Spotify. And it's usually like anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times more than what they have at that present moment. So if they're at, 5,000 monthly listeners, they want to be at 10,000. And, as an artist for myself, as Dukes, I hover around 80 to 100,000 monthly listeners a month on Spotify. And I can tell you, it doesn't do that much for my career. And so, not to disparage it, I think that it's a great question and a lot of people do wonder it. So yeah, if the question is, can I grow my streaming? Absolutely. I think there are effective ways to do that we teach and recommend. It's just that a lot of times it may not be the thing. If you're working with Indiepreneur to get guidance on your digital marketing, it may not be the first thing that we recommend that you do, but can you? Yes, absolutely. I think there are effective campaigns that you can run using short form vertical content to see considerable growth in your Spotify and on your numbers there. It's going to require investment from you in terms of being able to put those ad dollars up. And realistically, you talk about ROI, you're not going to see a return on that. It's certainly not initially. It's going to take you some time before you're at a point where you've invested enough to kind of tip the scales and now you're actually breaking even or profitable from the streams that you're getting from the ad dollars that you put into it.
Yeah. Yeah. You're totally on target with me there. It's often not the bottleneck that we identify for a lot of artists. And this goes even through the agency as well. Like, I can't tell you how many managers I've talked to about IndieX where they've said like, well, yeah, we want to get to 100,000 monthly listeners or 500,000 monthly listeners or whatever. And that's kind of like our big goal. And in a lot of cases, it comes with the same breath of like, yeah, and we need to be it needs to be super profitable doing it. And I'm like, we're probably not the agency for you. Like, we can help you be super profitable, but it's probably not by doing that. It's not the only thing you should focus on in your music marketing. A lot of times it goes hand in hand with audience growth, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why I wanted to address it here today, was like, can you do it? Of course you can. And I think you started to touch on like what you can do to multiply your monthly listeners by tapping into short form content. I'd love to hear you kind of expand upon that a little bit with any stories that are useful.
To your point, definitely. Yeah, it's something that you can do. I think one thing that's helpful for people to set in when they go into it is like, what amount of money are you prepared to lose to get there? Because I think that is going to be really important. And if you just do the math, we tell people if you can get 15 to 30 cents per click on a streaming Spotify campaign, marketed to good traffic, green light countries, that's good. That's a great cost per click, right? And then when you look at the average payout, which last I had checked from Spotify was 0.00408 cents, compare that to your cost per click, you can see how much you're fighting a losing battle. So it's going to be really challenging. But again, to the question of like, how can you do it? And, taking aside whether you should or shouldn't, I think, running, first off, like testing your short form vertical content, finding what works for you well, whether it's organically or with a little bit of ad spend behind it, to find those clips in your songs that are resonating with people, that are engaging or exciting. A lot of times still we recommend that live or live-esque performance content, putting yourself out there in your music and kind of showcasing what you do in an organic way. You know, I worked with an artist for a while, an IndieFounder named Case, and, you know, he went from 600-700 monthly listeners, and a big goal for him was to hit 10,000 monthly listeners. And we were able to get there. You know, he definitely had to invest a fair amount in terms of his ad spend to be able to get to that point. And I think in order to sustain it, a lot of times you do need to continue to invest in those ads, but certainly it's possible. And we help artists with that all the time. It's just, again, I think the bigger question comes down to, is that the best thing for you to be focusing on? Is it the best thing for you to put your ad dollars towards?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point about testing creatives, how to test creatives, how to get better at creating content around your music, so that maybe you can avoid having a testing budget at all. Because if you have something going organically, then, big thumbs up. You've probably got an asset that's working well for you. I also think it's interesting to note that, like, over time, you can start to build up like a critical mass of an audience on platforms, DSPs, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever. And then you can get like algorithmic triggering happening. And that's great. Like, you can do that with paid traffic. And then, the organic sort of overflow that happens from that, does that profit, pay back your marketing?
Yeah.
Maybe eventually, it certainly can. And it's really then how you frame and look at it, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to, and we said this in kind of part one, last episode of this conversation, is like, everyone has different goals, and there is no one size fits all. And there is no, again, as I said, like curriculum. I think there are instances, with streaming where social proof is a factor. Look at all the monthly listeners I have. If you're a band that's really trying to secure like an opening slot on a tour or book certain venues, maybe there are advantages to having a heavy presence on streaming. And in that instance, I would ask yourself, okay, like, if we know that that's our goal, is this something we're willing to invest to get? Because again, I do think it's possible to get to that point. It's just going to take time and ad dollars to get you there. So yeah, if there are instances where you find yourself in that position and you feel like that'll be beneficial, go for it, But I do think it's really about trying to figure that out and determine what the best fit for each individual artist is and what makes sense for them.
Well said, for sure. That taps into like, what is the motive behind what you're trying to accomplish with streaming? Like, I don't call it a vanity metric in a way that's negative, really. But if you're considering it as social proof, like you said, for the purpose of trying to get an opening slot or getting a booking agent to look at you or a promoter or whatever. We talked about this with Andy on the podcast a few weeks back. And that was similar reasons that they were trying to tap into bumping up their streaming numbers for as December falls, specifically for that purpose, for touring purposes. And that's a fine reason to want to do it. You're trying to leverage those numbers for really like negotiations, right?
Yeah.
But you're right in saying that then the question that you have to ask yourself is, what am I investing to get there? You're going into it knowing that you're not investing to get there for the profit that investment might drive to pay you back.
Right.
It's for a completely different purpose.
Right. And again, for some, like in Andy's case and in some artists I've worked with and come across, it's like, maybe that makes sense for you. I just think it's really important to not get tunnel vision. It should not be the only thing you're focusing on. All the other things that we talk about, that we, are going to talk about in this episode, last episode, and in general, what you and Cirque talk about all the time, like, to me, that's the important stuff. That's kind of the meat and potatoes. And if you want to go on a side quest and say, hey, I want to hit 50K monthly listeners on Spotify, and you understand what it might mean for you to get there, go for it. That's up to everyone's individual determination and kind of finding your way through it. But I mean, again, just speaking from my own personal experience, I've spent very little on streaming ads to grow my Spotify presence. I think the biggest thing that's grown my presence on Spotify is fan acquisition and good marketing elsewhere. You know what I mean? And that has kind of what has contributed to that and kind of trickled in over the years of me being able to grow that. But it wasn't from me spending 10 grand on Spotify ads, to get there. So yeah, I think each individual artist has to kind of cross that bridge when they get to it and determine what really makes sense for them and what's worth it in the long run.
I love that, man. And it's funny because when we were talking about that specifically pre-roll before started recording, we were kind of kicking around like, well, how deep do we want to get into talking about like what kind of ad campaigns to run and stuff? And we could give you a simple sort of like a campaign structure right now, like, run campaigns, meta campaigns, specifically Instagram Reels, focus on Reels, short form vertical content, go with fairly broad audiences, targeted in groups, and start there with the best content that you have, anything that's gone well organically, or test. If you don't have anything that's gone well organically, start testing organically and then bring it over to paid. We can give you that, but I think you're right in saying that like the bigger conversation around this is like, yeah, that's one strategy that we could pull from in a playbook to grow streaming, but you have to do a bit of soul searching ahead of time to know like, is this a side quest for me? And when I've got this in place, what am I doing next?
Well, and that opens up a whole other can of worms, which is like, if that's the only thing you're investing in and you spend all this time putting all these ad dollars and traffic into Spotify, guess what? You don't really get a lot of data back. And so it's like, I think the argument could be made that focusing on other areas where you do retain more of that data is going to be a lot more beneficial. Like, again, I keep coming back to myself because I think it's the best example I can give in this, where it's like, I thought for a long time coming up in the music industry in LA that it's like, oh, I need to get on these editorial playlists. I need X number of monthly listeners. And then it's like, I got there and it's like, man, this doesn't really do much for me. Like, I get a few $100 a month and that's cool. It definitely helps my business, but I can't reach those people directly. I kind of roughly know how old they are and where they're based in the world, but even that is kind of gate kept and questionable. And it's like, that's it. That's the extent of the information and the access that I have to these people.
Yeah. Well, and this brings up another question, I think, is, and I get this from artists all the time too, is going beyond just streaming numbers, talking about things like charting and stuff like that. This is where we start to get into wondering about, again, like, I don't use this term as like a disparagement really, but like, it's vanity metrics, right? Like, a charting position is it's social proof, or it's a vanity metric, whatever you want to call it on that spectrum of terminology. But when it comes to music marketing, like, where does that sort of thing fit into this? I know we've helped artists do that kind of thing plenty of times at the agency, for sure, but it's usually a byproduct of strong marketing. And maybe we start by talking about that. Like, these sorts of things are byproducts of strong digital marketing and having strong goals around what you're trying to do. And that can really be useful. But I know there's a few examples of that inside of the IndieFounder team as well.
Yeah, there was an artist we worked with, Joe is the first name, and he came in to Founder kind of having a goal, I think, of kind of wanting to chart or at least explore that. And again, I think at that point he had amassed, certainly enough of a customer base to have that be maybe a valid want, right? It's like, in other words, if you're just starting out and you've never sold a copy of a record, you're fighting a little bit more of an uphill battle to be in that kind of position. Whereas if you are a little bit more of an established artist, again, kind of going back to what we said about systems and infrastructure, I think a big thing that we helped Joe with was he knew he was in a position to sell records and be able to do that. But a lot of it was a matter of kind of optimizing, taking a look at what he had at that moment and being able to say, okay, here's what you're doing right, but here's where things could be improved. And again, in that instance, working with Founder takes that expert eye kind of looking over your shoulder to say like, yeah, what you're doing is great. Here's where we can kind of optimize. Here's where we can make some tweaks to really see this stuff perform better. And in his case, we were able to help him do that. I believe he charted at number 6 on I think it was like a blues chart, a Billboard Blues. So, that's there and it's possible. I think especially if you can move a lot of units, it might just be a matter of really looking at what you're doing and where you can optimize and kind of eke out more wins.
What are some of the optimizations in a case like that you're looking at?
I think the big thing with him was definitely creative, like perhaps some of the creative that he was using maybe wasn't the strongest or could have been improved kind of, again, through testing and looking at what was working and what wasn't. Kind of something we talked about earlier is copy. I think copy is a huge component of that, especially when you talk about sales. And in that instance, that is what the goal was, is like, hey, let's move enough units to where we can chart. So really looking at that, I think that's a great place to start. And then certainly from there, outside of you looking at your creative and your copy, is like campaign setup and how are you structuring your ad campaigns? Where can you make changes? Is your audience too specific? Is it maybe too broad, and kind of narrowing some of that stuff down and working through that for that like iterative improvement as you're looking at that stuff.
This is a great example of not knowing what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
I think when it comes to optimization and trying to improve your marketing, I've certainly experienced this with any business coach I've ever worked with or strategist I've ever worked with. The reason for doing it has always been like to help me uncover the blind spots that I probably never would have found myself. And I think that this is true of music marketing for so many artists, but especially ones that have stuff going on for them. They've been doing things either themselves or they've hired teams, but they're just wondering like, how do I take this to the next level? Or how do I get it over the finish line to the goal that I've been trying to hit? And so often that kind of process of auditing and optimizing and retesting is such a big part of it.
Yeah, it really is. And just like you said, it's like you don't know what you don't know. And, I think, again, there's a reason that I say a lot of times I think IndieFounder is the best product we have at Indepreneur. And it's not to be salesy or try to toot our own horn, but it's like, it's one thing to go through Indie Pro, and if you're the kind of person that learns well with courses and you're kind of self-starting and able to navigate through that stuff and ask for help when you need it, it's a great option. But so much of that is baked into IndieFounder where it's just automatic. Like you just have that from day one where you're working with an expert. We don't throw that around lightly. It's like anybody in IndieFounder that is coaching people has been through the ringer, has worked with, so many different clients from so many different genres and at so many different levels. And whoever is joining the program really gets to benefit from that right from day one. So it's like, to your point, they can look at, okay, like, here's what you're doing well. Here's where we can improve. Here's what you're not doing so well, and kind of take stock of those things and make those recommendations.
I love that, man. I have a lightning round question for you.
Let's do it.
What is the number one thing you wish every single artist knew about music marketing?
That it can be fun and you can enjoy it if you allow yourself to do that. Because again, I said this in the last episode, I don't know many people that got into music to be marketers. I know a lot of people that got into music to be musicians, but in this day and age, if you want to be an independent artist and you're not learning how to effectively market yourself, it's going to be a rocky road for you. And you're just kind of hoping that someone else is going to come in and do it for you. And that's unlikely to happen. So I think if I could show more people that, and even myself, when I started my journey with music marketing, I didn't like it. It wasn't fun and it was challenging and difficult. But as I've gotten into it and learned from other people at Indepreneur, people in our community, and really built those skills up myself, now it's fun and I enjoy it, and it can be fun and it can be exciting if you allow yourself. Just like I said, when you first started playing your instrument, you weren't great at it. I mean, maybe you were a virtuoso and you were, but most of us weren't. You have to build up those skills. Marketing is the same thing. And if you allow yourself to do that, it can actually be really fun and really exciting. And you'll just feel so much more in control of your own destiny. And I think that's so powerful.
I love that. Fun is such a good, dude, I couldn't agree with you more. The creativity that you can pour into your music marketing is what makes it so much fun. Another lightning round question for you. What do you hope to see in the music marketing landscape in the future here this year? Anything in particular on the horizon that is like most interesting to you?
I think more and more artists just kind of continuing to understand the power of something that we've been talking about for a long time, which is just like direct to fan, and again, I think when we talk about music marketing, it's like that can get really complicated in terms of people's ability to understand it. And like, it's like all these moving parts, but I think really at the end of the day, what it is that if you could like dumb it down and just say it simply, it's like, yeah, you're just like reaching your fans directly. And you're starting to hear that more in the music industry at large. I think more and more labels and
it's becoming a buzz. It's becoming a buzzword.
Like direct to fan. But like, we've been on that train for a long time. And I think we know it as well as anyone in terms of what that takes. And, I'm not intimidated by major labels or major artists starting to adapt more of that. I think it's great for the industry as a whole, because again, it puts more power back in the artist's hands, whether it's, Taylor Swift or someone that's just starting out that's never done anything. It's like the biggest thing you can do, the biggest thing you can focus on is like your relationships with your fans and establishing those and nurturing them and treating them with respect. So I would love to continue to see the industry shift more in that way. And I think in turn, fans will continue to give that back. You know what I mean? Like, people want to enjoy this stuff and consume music. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. So I hope that continues to be the trend that the industry kind of follows. And I know we will at IndiePreneur, but I hope that things continue to go in that direction.
I love that, man. That's so good. Thank you so much for sharing these stories and having this conversation with me, Jonah. This was super fun. I hope that you guys take these stories from IndieFounder and specifically these campaigns. Hopefully they help to answer questions that you might have about your own music marketing, things that you can deploy today, tomorrow, the next day, or yesterday, like Jonah has said. But dude, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the people listening, if you're curious about IndieFounder, if you want to just learn more about it, apply for the program. I do all of our consults for IndieFounder, so I am the person you'll be talking to, and I love this stuff. I do it for myself every day. Again, all these keywords around me are not for show. I'm really passionate about it. And, even if you're on the fence or unsure, I always just love talking to people in meetings. So throw that application in and I'll see you on a call.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for being here. Thanks, Jonah, for hanging out.
Yeah, thanks, man.
We'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace.